You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey listeners, let me let you in on a little secret. You don't have to stress about planning your class lessons, small groups, and individual sessions anymore. My school counseling membership program, Impact, is here to help. So, what do Impact members get? Monthly curriculum plans across all 3 tiers, SEL lessons, small groups, individual, and seasonal activities, step-by-step video implementation guides, bi-weekly Zoom coaching calls with me, and an exclusive Facebook group community. This membership is designed for school counselors who want to deliver the best possible content to their students, but who also want to just press the easy button. You'll get access to monthly curriculum plans, resources, support, and community so you can deliver quality, engaging, life-changing counseling lessons to your kiddos. So what do you think? Are you ready to make an impact? Join today at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of the School Counseling Simplified podcast. So it is the last week in July, and all month we have been talking about small groups on the podcast. So this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'm super passionate about small groups, and I want to make sure that you have all the information you need to get ready for back to school, because it is almost among us, which is crazy. It seems like the summer just started. So today, to wrap up our small group series, I want to talk to you about the meat and potatoes of it all, the small group curriculum, and that's how to design small group curriculum that works. So I'm trying to explain this very simply and easy to follow so you can implement these steps as you design your own small group curriculum. Now you may be thinking, hold up, design curriculum, that sounds really hard. What is she talking about? Well, you're likely doing one of 2 things. Step 1 is you're using activities that you purchase to implement your small groups. So whether this be a hard copy book curriculum that your school's provided for you, something like Zones of Regulation or Social Thinking, or perhaps this is something you spent your own money on TPT, and you purchased a curriculum over there. Those would both be examples of curriculum and activities that you purchased that you would use with your small group. The second way you could do it is you could completely come up with one on your own. So if you're not provided with a curriculum, which unfortunately I'm sure that's the case for most of you, you're probably scouring the internet looking for ideas, looking at Pinterest and YouTube and blog posts to try to piece together activities here and there and to form a small group. So either way is fine. I've totally done both. I usually end up doing a combination of the 2. I usually purchase some things and then create some of my own things and mix them together. So you can design it to best fit your needs. I'll link to some curriculums that I recommend in the show notes, both some that are my own for sale and some that I mentioned at the beginning. But regardless of which way you decide to go, these 6 steps can help you form and design this curriculum. Okay, so let's get started. Step 1, identify your topic. So based on your referral data, you're going to see what topic your small group needs to be on. So for this example, let's say self-control is our topic. So step 1, all you have to do is identify your topic. In this case, self-control. Okay, moving on to step 2. I promise they get a little more detailed. Step 2 is to outline your weeks with ASCA-aligned objectives. So first off, you need to determine how many weeks you'll be meeting with students. I typically recommend 6 to 8 weeks. So let's say 6 weeks for the example. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose an objective for each week that you'd like your students to meet. Then you're going to take a look at the ASCA mindsets and behaviors and make sure that you have aligned mindset and behaviors that go with your objective. And then you're going to write out the outline of what you're actually going to do in the session. Sounds like a lot, so let me walk you through it. So, for example, if this is a self-control group, week 1, it's probably just going to be an introduction to self-control, right? So our objective could say something like this. The objective is to collaborate in a group counseling setting and define self-control. So that's, we're setting the bar pretty low for the first session here. We just want the kids to collaborate and to be able to come away with an understanding of what the word self-control means. So then I have selected 4 ASCA mindset and behaviors, and we'll link to those in the show notes. That is a free resource online you can access. And the reason we want to do this is because we want to make sure that we are aligned to standards, right? And that we're not just randomly picking things to talk about with our kids, because not only do we want to use data to measure the effectiveness of our program, but we also want to make sure that it's aligned with ASCA, or the American School Counselor Association. So let's take a look. So these are all behaviors, and one of the ones I've selected is BSMS2, demonstrate self-discipline and self-control. Wow, well, our topic's self-control, so that one's perfectly aligned. Another one says create positive and supportive relationships with other students, use effective collaboration and cooperation skills, and use leadership and teamwork skills to work effectively in diverse teams. Those all go along with my objective of collaborating in a group counseling setting and defining self-control. Perfect. So I'll kind of type up a little introduction page. I'll write down these mindsets and behaviors that I've selected. You can just copy paste them from that form to reference them. And then I'll write out my objective. Now I need to type up my outline. So the outline for the first session is going to be establish some group rules, because it's our first time we're doing group rules. And I did a more deep dive into this. We'll link to it in the show notes. There's some podcast series I did back in, it was March or April, where I go a little deeper into all of these things. So we will link to that in the show notes as well. But it's session 1, so you want to establish group rules, followed by a feelings check. Then we'll likely do a self-assessment, an icebreaker, an activity, and wrap it up with a journal. So that's kind of my outline I'm going to function on. So instead of just trying to remember all these things and like, ooh, what was I going to do in today's session? If you sit down before you have even started your counseling sessions and plan them out and write up this outline, then you'll know exactly what's to come. Now, this outline is also helpful because, as I mentioned in a previous episode, if you're going to share a parent letter with parents, letting them know what you plan on doing in the group and what they can expect, you could give them an example, like, hey, here's an example of one of our group outlines, so you can kind of get an idea of what we're working on. You could also share this with teachers if you wanted to, and I encourage you to share it. And I encourage you to share it with the students themselves, even the ASCA mindsets and behaviors, especially if they're a little older. Get them really invested in meeting their objective and really invested in the learning. Okay, so that's step 2, is outlining the weeks with ASCA-aligned objectives. Step 3, select icebreakers. So you may have heard me mention in our outline that we're going to have an icebreaker. So I like to start every session out with an icebreaker, especially the very first session. In the first session, spend more time on the icebreaker because we're trying to break the ice and get everyone to feel comfortable, right? But instead of going straight into the deep work and expecting kids to share and get vulnerable, it's always nice to kind of ease them in with a little icebreaker. So after we do, each week I'll have the group rules and the feelings check, as I mentioned. But step 3, I want you to specifically focus on planning which icebreakers you're going to do. So what are these going to look like? Are they going to be discussion cards? Are you going to do a dice game? Do you have a video you're going to show? Do you have some kind of movement activity like a Simon Says type game? So figure out your icebreakers. Step 4, select your activities. So this is the bulk and the core of your group session. This is why you're meeting. So this is where you're going to look at your curriculum. What are you teaching them? Are you teaching them, is the objective of this session to learn 3 coping strategies, or to be able to identify a coping strategy when they're feeling upset? Well, in order to meet that objective, you need to make sure that you're teaching them that. So how are you going to teach that? Are you going to do a social story? Are you going to create a coping skills toolbox? Are you going to play a board game where they have to identify them? You need to figure out what you're going to do to teach them the objective. So this could be crafts, it could be games, it could be self-reflections, collages. Think about what you're doing in your small groups. But again, you don't want it to be random, like, oh, I saw this cool self-esteem collage on Pinterest. That's great, but you want to make sure that you're meeting your objective that's aligned with this ASCA mindsets and behaviors. So if your objective is, if you're in a self-esteem group and the objective is student can identify 3 positive traits about themselves, then the collage is a great way to do that. So it doesn't have to be boring. It's just totally be creative and fun. Just make sure that it's an activity that corresponds with your objective. The icebreaker doesn't have to directly relate to the objective. It can be topic specific, but a little more loosey-goosey, just to kind of get everybody talking. But then you want step 4, the activity, to definitely align with the objective. Okay, moving right along. Number 5, select a reflection piece. So I like to do journals for these. Now, far too often we do the activity and then like the bell rings or you realize, oh no, we're out of time to wrap it up, guys. But I really encourage you to try to get your timing right, to allow like 5 minutes at the end for a reflection piece where students can go back independently and write, or, preferably write, but maybe they talk but just really think about what they've learned in that session and how it applies to their growth in this counseling skill they're working on. So that's selecting a reflection piece. Like I said, I like to do journals. And finally, step 6 is create your self-assessment. So we want to be collecting data, like I mentioned a couple episodes ago. Self-assessments are a great way to collect data. So you want to create the self-assessment to send to your students. So you may be thinking, you may hear me talk about data and think, oh, well, that's great. I definitely want to do self-assessments to measure progress. But then you might be thinking, I don't know how to do a self-assessment. So it's super simple. What you can do is, again, base it on your weekly objective, because remember, that's what we're trying to measure. Did the student meet the objectives? So for self-control, I'll give you an example. A self-control self-assessment, we just go week by week. So remember, week 1, our objective was to collaborate in a group setting and define self-control. So our first question on our self-assessment is, I know what self-control is. Yes or no? Can they define it? Yes or no? So when you do this as a pre-test, a pre-self-assessment, they might put no, and that's okay. They're in a self-control group to learn this. But afterwards, you're hoping that they circle yes, because in week 1, you were supposed to teach them self-control by doing a game, right? So you would do some kind of game or activity to teach them what self-control meant. That way, you can measure, did they learn it or not? Did they learn the objective from week 1? Another thing you could do in the later week in a self-control group, perhaps you're teaching them about triggers, those things that trigger them to have certain behaviors. And you want them to know what a trigger is and to identify some triggers. That's the objective. So then on your self-assessment, you could have these questions. I know what a trigger is. Yes or no? I know what my triggers are. Yes or no? Things like that. So I hope that makes sense. But basically, as you're forming your self-assessment, it can even match. You can have more than one question per week. So for example, I had 2 trigger questions on the self-assessment, or 2 trigger statements on the self-assessment, and triggers is only 1 week. So it's not going to be 6 weeks, 6 questions. Your self-assessment's likely going to be a little longer than that, but that's where you're getting the questions from. That's how you're forming your self-assessment, is by looking at your objectives and you're figuring out if the student met them or not. And the beauty in this is that it's super simple to see if there's any deficits or if there's anywhere you need to fix. So for example, let's say at the end of the week, all your students are showing progress in most areas except no one can name a trigger. They all answered no on the post self-assessment. Before the group, they didn't know what a trigger is, and after the group, they still don't know what a trigger is. Well, then you go back, that was week 3, I was teaching them about triggers. Let's go back and see, maybe this video didn't resonate with them. Maybe this activity didn't make sense to them. Maybe I didn't explain this in a way that was easy for them to understand. So then you can tweak that session, and then the next time measure and then see, this time they all said yes, that's what the problem was. So this is a great way for us to continue to refine our curriculum and to simply design small group curriculum that works. Okay, guys, I hope those 6 steps were super helpful as you sit down to design your small group curriculum. I'll link to some of my small group curriculum in the show notes. I've done the work for you. I have a small group bundle that has 20 groups in it, and it has all of the ASCA-aligned outlines and objectives. They all include self-assessments. So all of that good stuff, I'll link to that in the show notes. Be sure to download my small group cheat sheet as well. I don't want you to miss this freebie. It will definitely help you as you plan your small groups this back-to-school season. All right, guys, talk soon.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.